Welcome, everybody, to the Philadelphia Portal. It's good to be with you today. We chose the name before Philly actually had like a real portal for a little while. And so now we may have to change the name actually to something else. But we just wanted to say a few things up front about this series. First of all, Sterling, it's good to be with you, my friend.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Yeah. And shout out to Alex, excited for this conversation as someone who drives for public transportation in Rhode Island and are dealing with cuts as well. I mean, I think that kind of gives a good example of part of why we want to do this series. Obviously, it's to have conversations about what's going on in Philadelphia, but also so that people that are working and organizing and living in their own parts of the country or the world can hear things that we talk about and say, hey, something very similar to this is going on here as well. Like, how are people dealing with it or not dealing with it? And also just to kind of foster discussion, dialogue, debate among folks on the left, really, within Philadelphia, because there's really not a lot of spaces as media projects where folks can do that. And initially, a few of us had gotten together and we were like, oh, we're going to start a magazine or a newspaper or something like that. And we did a call out on Instagram to try to get some articles. And that didn't really lead to much. So we were like, well, like, let's just start having some conversations and kind of build this thing up organically. And hopefully it will develop into more of that, more space for people to do local reporting, analysis, journalism, also kind of debate about, things like strategies and tactics and things like that. And so we hope to kind of do all of that over time. But in particular, there's one issue right now in Philadelphia that even had national news at a certain point, a couple weeks ago, which is around SEPTA, which is it stands for Southeastern Pennsylvania Transit Authority, I think.
Authority, yeah.
Yeah. And it's basically it's like our version of the MTA, I guess, for people who are familiar with like New York system. It's not a very robust public transportation system, but it has a lot of bus routes, some regional rail lines, some trolley lines, and also a subway with, I think 2 or 3 lines, maybe just 2. And yeah, so that's it. But it matters a lot to people in Philadelphia and in the surrounding suburbs. It's like a key way that we also don't have a very good highway system here in Philadelphia. And so it's really difficult. You can sit in long commutes coming in and out of the city, or even just going from one part of the city to another. And then parking is an issue. So anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get into that in a minute. But Sterling, do you want to say some things up front, just kind of about like the series and some of the things we want to delve into and kind of what we want to do with this project?
Yeah. So yeah, I'm Sterling. Good to see everybody. I love Philadelphia, so I think there's a lot of parts of it that have a lot of resonance nationally and internationally, and there's also a lot of resistance. There's a lot of organizing going on here, and like when we were talking about like how do we do this, we just thought it would be a good time to talk about, to have some people come on, talk about like what are the places that like within the ecosystem, like nationally, that we want to talk about. I know we have SEPTA here, but there's issues around, things that I really care about are like harm reduction, homelessness. There are large universities here, like University of Pennsylvania. There are connections to Israel and Russia and so many other places, and China. There's so many things happening in Philadelphia in terms of money, and also to give out like where is Philadelphia in relation to the kind of the East Coast, like power centric power centers, and Philadelphia ends up being one of them because we have, for example, like, you know, Joe Biden like had a center at the University of Pennsylvania that he just plopped a bunch of people and put them in the Department of State, right? So, but yeah, you know, I feel like this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just the beginning, but you know, this is we just wanted to lay out a lot of that for people.
Yeah, so we'll be kind of delving into different struggles, different things people are organizing around in the city, you know, different aspects of the history and large employers, big connections, and things like that. And yeah, just trying to make a show that's basically a local show that also is connected up with, you know, how capitalism functions, how it impacts people here, how people struggle against that, and also help people see international connections also on a local level, because there's a lot of ways that you know, the international does impact the local as well. So yeah, so that's it. So we'll get into more of that maybe in a little bit, but why don't we kind of get into the SEPTA piece a little bit? We have a guest with us today, another person who's been a part of the you know, kind of planning and building of this project, which is Wiley. Wiley, I'm going to go ahead and bring you to the stage. Let me know if you're not ready, but are you there?
I'm here.
All right, man. So Wiley, do you want to kind of start us and talk a little bit about your understanding? I mean, I don't know if we should start, maybe we should start with some political context of Philadelphia for folks. Obviously, it's a Democrat controlled city through and through. You know, there are very few Republicans. Um, there's certainly there are different types of Democrats, right? But you know, we currently have a mayor, Sherelle Parker. Before that, we had a mayor, Kenny, here. There's a city council. And then I guess an important thing to say up front is that at the state level, you know, Pennsylvania went for Trump in 2024. It is a kind of, you know, a swing state, a purple state. The state house is often controlled in one or both of the legislatures at a state level by Republicans, but also most of the governors have been Democrats. And currently, our governor is Josh Shapiro, who was almost Kamala Harris's running mate until I think they decided that his Zionism might overshadow her Zionism or something along those lines. But anyway, Wiley, do you want to start with laying out a little bit of the SEPTA crisis?
Sure, I'll do my best, and maybe you guys can fill in. But hey, I'm Wiley. I'm an organizer with Philadelphia Housing Action. Thanks for having me on. SEPTA and public transit is not exactly like what I work on. I'm more of like a housing activist, but I guess you know, the way that it intersects for me and I care about it is I work with a lot of like real low income working class people. I also work with a lot of homeless people, and there's a way that like SEPTA and their police department interacts a lot with that community, and a lot of people find shelter in SEPTA places. So it does like touch very much on the community I work with a lot. And I guess just to give you some broad strokes of like what's going on, you know, and again, like I'm sure there's people who are gonna be like transit dorks that feel like I don't get it or I'm glossing over some of the details, but SEPTA is like a regional transportation authority that serves various counties, and Philadelphia is the biggest one by far, but it has like, you know, some of the wealthiest counties in the country are also served by SEPTA, but it's a state authority, so it's funded through the state legislature, and like individual counties make contributions to the budget. And this year was a year where SEPTA basically like drew this line in the sand and said that we need like a permanent funding source from the state for our like long-term capital needs and operational needs, or we're going to have to cut service. And they were saying, like, we used to have a permanent revenue stream, and it got taken away by the state legislature some years ago, and then we rode for a while on some COVID funding, and now that's run out, and we really need y'all to figure this out, or we're going to have to, like, basically cut service by 20% and raise fares by 20%. And they said, like, we have to do this on the first day of school in Philadelphia. We're going to cut Philadelphia's bus service by 20%, and we're not going to cut the regional rail yet. And then a couple of weeks later, we're going to cut the regional rail, and we're going to raise fares for everybody to $2.90 a trip. That's sort of like the broad strokes. And then here in Philly, and just kind of like regional transit, like advocates, from what I could see, we're largely targeting the Republicans who are in the state Senate as targets to try to push them to get the funding for SEPTA. And they were hearing from Democrats like, yeah, we want this, we got you, it's just the Republicans are holding up the budget and they won't make a budget. And like Pennsylvania is now, I think we were supposed to have a budget by July 1st and we still don't have a budget. And that was sort of like where I came into it, is kind of like I think maybe everyone was like, oh, they're going to figure it out before that, before the cuts happen. And then they didn't, and then I kind of started paying a lot more attention to it. And it seemed to me that the strategy of targeting Pennsylvania state Republicans, a few of whom are in Philly, from Philly districts, wasn't like the best strategy, because in my mind, you kind of like leave the Democrats off the hook. And that's most of who we can access are like people here in Philly. And if you're leaving them off the hook and the Republicans are going to take the blame for when they don't figure it out, then they're not that motivated to like expend their political capital to make a deal. That was my sort of take. And I put that out there in the world, and I got really attacked by a lot of the transit people, and including some of the socialists here. And I was like, well, this is weird, because essentially like the progressive electoral left and socialist electoral left were in this position where they were the ones defending the cuts, because they were like, no, SEPTA really needs this. It's not a joke. They have to get this budget. Otherwise, there has to be cuts. And then they didn't get the budget. And then they're kind of like saying like, well, that's what's going to happen. We're going to have cuts, instead of taking a different line from SEPTA or the Democrats and being like, you know what, tax some rich people and get the money for the SEPTA. Like, we don't need an austerity budget. We're going to fight austerity. They were kind of in a position of defending the cuts. So I guess that's my overview. I'll leave it there for a minute.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to kind of start us. And I think like, obviously on some level, people I think would rightly ask, like, why would Republicans care? Right? Like, I mean, I think this is one of the things, is that there's already this antagonism, right? Within Pennsylvania, right? I would say a lot of people are antagonistic to Philadelphia if they don't live near it, right? There's this whole, I mean, we've seen, right, Trump talking about Philly as like a really bad place and things like this during his first term, right? It was one of the cities that he's kind of singled out as like being uniquely terrible. Obviously, the right has also blamed, in part, the 2020 election on like a malfeasance or whatever, right? Which is all BS, to be clear, but like this idea that the election was stolen, in Philadelphia and these kind of things. And so it's kind of counterintuitive on one level that people would think that this is going to be a useful, even electoral strategy to like create a crisis and then try to blame it on like state Senate Republicans or whatever. When also like the state is very well like gerrymandered, right? It's very well like it's very hard for Democrats in the state to win both legislatures and the governorship, right? And so the idea that that would happen as a result of something like this, it seems not very likely to me, and it also just seems like a strategy where like the people who are most impacted by these cuts are like are Democrats, but they're also like, you know, working class, poor people, a lot of black folks, right? A lot of like other, you know, Latinos, et cetera, right? Like folks that, and like you're doing this on the back of them. And I mean, I think that's one of the things that's an irony in this is like the way that this got stopped is that SEPTA got sued um, on a like, at least in part on like civil rights issues, right? Of like you're cutting your cuts disproportionately impact like black folks and you know folks of need, right? Like folks without a lot of money. And you know the court was like you can't do that. Like you can raise the rates, which now we have to deal with a rate hike, which is another thing that still is going through. They weren't able to cut the bus service, but it just becomes this kind of fiasco where you know it looks terrible. And it actually, if it the only reason it didn't go through is because of a conservative lawsuit basically that um that was set up to stop it from going through. So I don't know, Sterling, if you have anything to add at this point.
Not really, but I wanted to see, Wiley, can you talk more about like that experience at the hearing and I guess the things surrounding the lawsuit, to restate it again?
Yeah, sure. I'll just fill in a little bit. So, like, there was a guy, Lance Haver. He's with a local small, like, nonprofit news outlet here, the Hall Monitor, Philadelphia Hall Monitor. But he used to be the consumer advocate for Philly, and he was working for the government the last time SEPTA tried to cut service here, and the Philadelphia city government sued SEPTA the last time in the early 2000s on exactly what you're talking about, like a civil rights sort of grounds, to say like you can't like raise fares or cut service. And they were able to like get the governor and the state legislature to like pull some money out of like the toll roads or something like that to like balance the budget. So that same guy like joined with a Republican lawyer who like helped fight the removal of the Columbus statue here in Philly and helped fight around like the 2020 election stuff. He like basically joined a Republican lawsuit to sue SEPTA and block the service cuts. And again, like you said, he lost on the fare hike stuff. They didn't win that, but they did block the service cuts. And the judge who ruled on that case is the baby mom of a state senator from here in Philly, Democrat, Sharif Street. It's his baby mom. I'm blanking on her first name, but her last name's Street as well. That was the judge presiding over the case. And then Sherelle Parker, our mayor, who's like a Democrat, but like pretty right wing, like really anti-homeless, really anti-drug, like wants to lock people up and put them in facilities and that kind of stuff. She released some money that the city had budgeted for, like if SEPTA did get their budget. They were kind of like holding it back to sort of like help put pressure on like a resolution to the budget thing. But she arrived at releasing that money before anyone on the left was really calling for there to be some money found to like prevent service cuts. So like that first day of school, like mad kids didn't make it to school on time. People were hella late. And
Wiley, did we lose you?
that
That
stopped.
there you go.
Do you have me? Sorry. Yeah, it was a lawsuit that stopped it, and then some of the Philly like Democratic Party machine like gummed up the works too. But yeah, like what eventually happened was the Governor Shapiro, who's like he said, he's a Zionist. Like he worked at the Israeli consulate in DC as his first job out of college doing public relations. You know, he's very much in the mix with all that. And he basically told the Republicans, like, all right, look, we're just going to like dip into SEPTA's capital reserve and we're not going to figure out the budget this year. Like, whatever, you know, we'll just kick the can down the road. And he did basically like exactly what I was afraid of, which is just be like, make it a 2026 election issue. This is why you should vote blue and try to flip the state Senate. And this, you know, this is why you should mobilize and like come out to vote. And like, meanwhile, like it's low-income folks in Philly who like have to pay for that, you know? So now SEPTA's like running off of its capital budget, which is gonna like mean that like a few years from now, there's like way bigger problems because now they don't have the operations budget or the capital budget. And it's also by raising fares, they're gonna reduce ridership, and then they're gonna have less of an ability to like do a budget request as a result. So it's this kind of like downward spiral that was sort of like the Republicans' whole reason for like holding out on the budget for so long. So like the governor made that concession and they still don't have a budget. And it's been more than a week. It's been almost 2 weeks now. There's still no budget. So fares are going up. I think today, I think they kicked in today. And yeah, I don't know. I went to, SEPTA has a board meeting every month, and they had a board meeting that first week of the service reduction. And I went there and there was no one there. There was like 2 other public commenters there. One gentleman was talking about like this bus change that they're talking about doing down the line. And the other guy was complaining about young people not paying the fare and like jumping fare and like saying we need more cops and more fare enforcement. And then there was me and like there was no one else showing up there. And like the SEPTA board, you know, there's like 2 appointees from every county that SEPTA serves, and then there's 2 appointees from the House, from the PA House, and 2 appointees from the Senate, and then the governor has an appointee. So like there's all these like lawyers and stuff. The guy that the governor appointed, Fox, he's the guy that the governor appointed to the University of Pennsylvania board to crush the Palestine protest encampments, and who's been leading a lot of the like kind of crackdown on free speech, anti-Semitism like stuff at UPenn. And like Philly has their like Department of Transportation person on there and stuff like that. And I'm just kind of like at this meeting and I'm just saying like, yo, if we don't get this budget, you better find the money somewhere, you know. It's like not acceptable, you know. But I was more just kind of like just sort of confused about like why in Philly there's not sort of some like electoral left formation that's like being like, hey, this is a cut, this is an austerity budget, like we need to mobilize against this. And I just thought it was like really interesting example of like how electoral politics can like lead you in really weird directions sometimes, where like something that would be that intuitive like would just not make sense to people in the moment, and where like you might even argue against someone like saying, hey, we need to like put pressure on local politicians at the county level around this, you know.
I think it's a good point, and I think that that's kind of one of the broader topics that I wanted to make sure we touch on a little bit today, is just this weird kind of climate that we're in right now where, you know, as you said, Wiley, like struggling against austerity somehow seems counterintuitive to folks on the left because they're sort of subordinating their own political sensibilities, I guess you could say, to the Democrats, right? Of it's just sort of like, well, we elect these people, right? And it's interesting because it hasn't always been the case in Philly, and even in recent history, you know, when Kenny was mayor, you guys and others were a part of, you know, struggles that were going on in the city, that were about, you know, bread and butter issues, you know, issues of, you know, housing and things like this. And I know that that's, you know, that's a little bit different, but like Wiley was talking about, I mean, this was crazy. You're talking about the first day of school and you have tons and tons of kids that don't have a way to get to school, like, because, as for people who don't know, like, SEPTA provides some of they give, like, cards out to kids, basically, so that they can ride the bus, the city buses, not school buses, on the way. And they don't have enough school buses. They don't have enough school bus drivers. Like, Philly has also sometimes in recent years paid parents a stipend to drive their own kid all year long to school, right? So there's already this, like, real hollowing out of already a very limited public infrastructure. I mean, I think it's important to also say about SEPTA that it has, I think, the oldest, like, fleet of trains, or whatever the term is for trains, right? Like, it has the oldest trains in the United States in terms of, like, a major public transit system. Like, a lot of the trains are still from, like, the 70s. And so, like, as Wiley was talking about depleting that capital budget in order to cover, some of the costs for a few years, like, this is, leading in a kind of, death spiral direction for this transit system. And so on one end, like, I don't have an issue with people trying to get Republicans at the state level to agree to pay for it. Like, the state should be paying for part of this. But if that's not politically viable, there are so many other institutions and wealthy people and, like, major capitalists, conglomerates, and, like, UPenn is the largest employer and has a huge endowment. We have the Sixers, the Eagles, the Flyers, like Comcast runs a lot of that. Like, so there's Aramark. There's a lot of, like, major corporate and financial stakes in the city that easily could be hit up to have to pay for this kind of stuff. But the politics of it is just, it's just not there. And you don't, and like Wiley was saying, like, it's people that he's having discussions with on the left that are also saying, and I mean, we should be clear about that. Like, we're talking about folks that are engaging with electoral left politics, right? So groups like DSA and stuff like that, that are there's no appetite really for a struggle that is just based on this issue of, like, hey, we're not accepting austerity. We're not accepting cuts that are coming on the backs of, like, poor people and working class people in the city, which should just be sort of a basic thing. And instead it's like a political football or a game of gotcha with, Senate Republicans who just don't care and really are not, it's not their constituents' issue either. You know what I mean? Like, it's somebody that lives in Harrisburg or, like, Erie, PA, or wherever. Like, why did they care if SEPTA is funded or not? Sterling, you want to add anything?
Yeah. I mean, and there is a little bit of that, and I mean, I do want to say that it is funding for SEPTA, but there has been a conversation around funding for all transit agencies across the state, and I think that shows some solidarity across, the suburban spaces, the rural spaces, where, like, if you're not rich, like, you can't get anywhere. I mean, I don't know, I guess to work, sure, but, like, it's really hard to get around. And it just shows how, like, regardless of Democrats or Republicans, like, they do not see those people, I would say myself, like, as a constituency. And part of this, I think transit is a really big issue for disabled people, and a lot of the capital funding that was being done was to, like, refurbish elevators and other accessible things. So now we're pitting people that are, like, poor or working class against disabled people, right? So those capital improvements aren't going to be done. I mean, there's just so much of this stuff that, like, structures it so people are going against each other instead of actually working towards, like, making something better. Yeah.
Yeah, Wiley, did you have anything else that you wanted to get into on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's just there are, like, other ways that this overlaps with the other work that we do. I guess like to kind of like talk about some of those fault lines again. Like, so some of the progressive left, like, and some of the elected, like, progressive left people, like, have in their coalition folks who are like transit advocates, who are also like folks that you maybe would describe as YIMBYs, or like yes in my backyard, people who like have a sort of like an abundance sort of outlook on progressive politics, which sounds a lot like, when you break it down, like trickle down economics, sort of like cut the red tape, let the developers build housing because that will lower housing costs or whatever. So like those folks have an invested like stake in transit. Like they were advocating for transit because they want to gentrify the neighborhood. Like they want transit to help their real estate values. And like, so like there's this way that like the transit tent is so big that it involves people that are like also calling for like the removal of homeless people and more policing and that kind of stuff. So like I just think that that's like an interesting like thing to look at, and like to see that, like, you know, I don't really like, if you're a progressive like elected, like you have to try to get shit done in the system with a bunch of people who like do not agree with you. You have to make compromises, and like if people ask you like what do you need from us on the outside, like you're going to tell them like to the best of your ability like what the calculus looks like on the inside and like how they could help, you know. And so it makes sense to me that like folks who have people that they support who are elected like are taking cues from them and taking, you know, some lead from them. And I guess like I don't know, I work on housing stuff, and I have to interact with a lot of elected officials all the time too. Like I'm not like outside the system in that way. And I like definitely have to make considerations sometimes about like, hey, like I need something from this person, so maybe I won't talk shit about them in public, you know, or whatever. So like I kind of get all that stuff. I just think it's like worth considering like how it is, you know, you avoid getting funneled into and recuperated into the Democratic Party electoral calculus. Because like if you're seriously like a socialist and you mean that in a way that you're more than a liberal, you know, where you want to tweak capitalism and make minor reforms around the edges, but like by and large it's going to keep going the way it's going. Like if you're trying to be a socialist in the way where you want to have progressive reforms over time that sort of like lead somewhere that's beyond capitalism, like you're going to have to come in conflict with this capitalist party, the Democratic Party, that you're using as a vehicle to try to get people elected. And I think this is like a national kind of conversation. You see it at the national level as well, but here in Philly, like it's just as real. And I think it's like important to like be able to support a candidate that's like more or less in line with your stuff, and then but also be outside of their political calculus and like pushing on other elected officials that might be in the same party, especially in a place like Philly where we're basically a one-party state. And like kind of like you were saying, like we're talking about like Republicans, Democrats, whatever, like the Republicans don't care if a bunch of people like mobilize to their district offices and are performatively protesting their pain. That's actually fine for them. Like for their political base, they're owning the libs, you know, that's good for them. You know, that helps. They're like, oh yeah, that guy's really doing it. And then their donor class loves it too. But for the Democrats, it's like a little harder if people are mobilizing to their thing and putting pressure on them, being like, you better figure this out, man. Like, we're not going to let, so what? Okay, yeah, the Republicans are bad, good, whatever. Like, what are you going to do about it? You know? And I feel like that's the energy that was kind of missing on this fight. And I think it's like important to talk about this because there's more coming up. Like, we're about to have school closures is the next thing that they're like talking about already. And it's well down. They've already kind of like said, we're going to close down at least 20 schools. And that's going to be the next big fight that people are going to need to mobilize around. And there's not going to be like state or national level electoral calculus in that, but I just think like it's worth kind of like taking a step back and being like, what went wrong here? And like, I think with the SEPTA thing, it's also like, are we really just going to let that go and like let the fare hikes go in? We're going to be paying $2.90 for a crappy bus ride or like a substandard subway. Like that's New York subway prices. Like we're really doing that here in Philly. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's where I'm at with it.
Yeah, appreciated, Wiley. I mean, I think, maybe we could connect in to some of the other, maybe we could talk about some of the other recent struggles and organizing that's gone on. And like, I mean, I think it's important to add the context too. I don't know how you both feel about this, but, Philly has had a mix of kind of like very neoliberal, Democratic politicians as well as more progressive ones, right? Like I'm not saying that these people are like super radical, right? But they're people that, folks can get a hold of, can get a meeting with, can talk to, can be pressured on certain issues, actually agree on certain issues, right? Those kind of things. And I feel like in the last election on a city level, it actually was a net negative, right? So like a lot of the um like a loss of city council kind of seats, right? That were maybe more progressive, more conservative leaning Democrats. I mean, these distinctions of Democrats and Republicans really don't matter that much. I remember discussions with like the San Francisco folks about their contexts too. And it's like, in their context, it's like everybody's a Democrat, right? But like when you get into it, the actual politics that people are supporting, those can be quite conservative, right? And I think that you really see that on a local level. You both have interacted in spaces and, know that like whether these people are in good standing with developers, meaning the city council folks, is like a huge part of it's like basically a necessity for them on some level, right? And so I think that's important context as well of like how does the left orient itself as it's actually losing electoral ground, right? Does it then like everybody might still be a Democrat, but you have fewer people that you can go to that are likely to give you the real time of day around a political issue. And so organizing in that context, maybe a little bit less like, oh, we're going to get all of these people onto our side because you're not going to get all of them onto your side, right? It's going to be like, okay, we have to like challenge these people not to do shitty things like this,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that, Sterling.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I see over and over again is city politics is about land. It's often about zoning. In Philadelphia, we're one of these cities and cities that are also a county. The council people have councilmanic prerogative, which means that they decide what is done in their district. So it's really on their personal whim. So if you piss them off, then you can't do your project. That's basically how it goes. And it also means that if they want to protect the current neighborhood and like stop development, they can do that too. And it's like they're often doing like 1 for us, but like 5 for the developers, and then also having some sort of stake in the development on a personal whim. And we come from a place where, crime is pretty regular. I guess crime as in like politicians going to jail. It's usually done out in the open. Like, one of the city council people was getting a $70,000. He had a $70,000 job with the IBEW, but also had his city council job for 140 grand. So of course, when you talk about like his position on projects, it was usually to build, and also make sure that those contracts rent to the right people, the correct people, right? And this is kind of old school. These are white working class people that are making sure they take care of their people. But it also, those people are also in jail. Johnny Dock is in jail. Bobby Heenan in jail, right? So, but when you're in Philly, that's just how it works. Like, there's no like sense of, this is what I tell people too who newly come here. It's like there's no sense of like, well, this is fair. It's like, no, people don't even have that idea of what it's like. No, this is how power is wielded, and you either get it together or you get crushed. And I don't know. It's just like very interesting to think about like how even Democrats were even positioned as like snowflakes or anything. I'm like, it's like when you're going to the city government, it's like you cannot, don't put anything in writing. Do not say anything. If you betray anybody or say anything, you will be cut. You will be blackballed. It's like, I feel like I'm blackballed so many different times by different people. Like, but that's the thing. It's like it is really that harsh, and it doesn't matter how much good you're doing. That's how it is, and we get access to people. We have good. I think people will say, well, you have Larry Krasner there. It's like, well, that doesn't matter that much. You can't do that much. He keeps getting voted in, but generally, just kind of a moderate Democrat policy. I mean, Mumia, our political prisoners are still in jail, so it's like I thought we were gonna like win on that. But that's like, it'd be great if all the political prisoners and at least you had some sort of way to overchange or change up the evidence that falsely put them in jail. That'd be great, but that's not what's happening. It's just kind of the regular stuff.
I guess I can jump in on that. Like, I guess like to speak to like Larry Krasner, he's our district attorney. 25 years ago, he was representing a lot of the defendants who were arrested at the Republican National Convention protest here. And he was the kind of the lawyer you go to if you got beat up by the cops. He'd sue the cops for you. And there was only like 4 or 5 lawyers who would do that in Philly at the time. And so now he's a district attorney, and like, I will say, like, I know grandmas on the block who are like still singing his praises because they remember like from before he was in there, we had one of the deadliest district attorneys in the country, Lynn Abraham, put more people on death row than like anyone, and she put Mumia there and all that. So like people remember what it was like and how you would get done by the district attorney's office, and like there's a lot of people now who like remember that, and they noticed the change, and I think that's why he keeps getting elected. It's like a palpable change for people that they experience. I think there's also like a lot of lifers who got out because he would like go over their cases, and there were a lot of like abolitionists who supported his candidacy and had access to him, and they were like, go back and look at this, and got some evidence back, got some recommendations back. There's definitely like cops who have been locked up, mostly not around like on-duty misconduct, but around domestic violence stuff. People have been put in prison who were cops for beating up women, for the most part. So like there's real material changes that are like undeniable. I think there's like other times where you get a progressive in who's good on every progressive issue, like they'll say the right thing and they'll show up at every protest and that kind of thing, but then maybe they won't use their councilmanic prerogative to make sure that neighborhood's not being gentrified, or make sure that people aren't losing their Section 8 housing, when they have like literally absolute power to do that. Like they can just do it, and for some reason when it comes to that issue, oh no, it just can't work that way, and it's this weird situation where maybe the machine politician who was in there for a generation or two before that was bad on progressive issues, so to speak. But when it came to like grandmas on the block being like, yo, you got to protect our neighborhood, like they would do shit for them. And like this new person, those kind of people don't have access to this person. So like you have like situations like that where sometimes the progressive person is like, on certain issues, they're actually worse. And like the issue that they maybe have the most power on, they're worse. And that comes back to what Sterling was saying, is like, it's real estate, you know, like if you want to get elected into a city council in almost any city in the United States, like it's about real estate, and you have to somehow make peace with developers or have some money that's coming from somewhere else that's going to keep you in the game, because otherwise they are going to get you the hell out of there. You know, and like maybe you build up enough of a machine behind yourself where you can stay there and it won't matter, and you can cut people sometimes but do them something the other time or whatever. But like I think that's like worth just saying, mostly just because I think like what you were getting at, Jay, like it's just important not to like flatten this into like political parties, blue good, red bad, like whatever with all that. Like these are people. Everyone in the system is just people. Like every institution you deal with, like there are people running those situations, and like those are. It's important to remember that, because not only can you like build a relationship with them and like maybe like get something out of them, but also like you can put pressure on them. You can figure out where they live. You can figure out who they do business with. You can like make their life sticky in a way where now they're like looking at you like, I don't want to do this for this person, but if it gets them off my back, maybe I'll just give them this one and keep it moving. You know, and I guess that's sort of like in our experience doing organizing here in Philly, it's been a lot more like that. Like when we've won stuff, it's more like we've raised the cost of not giving us what we want, which was usually like an easy thing that they can just do, enough where they decided it was just easier to do that. You know, and it wasn't because they wanted to or whatever. It was just like, if this will just make it get off my back, fine. And then maybe I can say I did something good later or whatever. I'll spin it, you know. But like a lot of the time, that's what like local politics looks like for us in a machine Democrat city, you know. And like it's weird to be like, yeah, like the Democrat machine is like something that, you know, ideologically I think is a problem. And then also like sometimes those are the people who are like actually going to fight for the hood, and like because that's their voting base, you know. That's where they. So if they can deliver for some grandmas on the block and people know about it, like they're maybe more likely to do that than a progressive politician who's got a really different base, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point, is like who people's bases are. Like I know that like I don't know how much we want to get into this today, but like, you know, Helen Geim, like she had her, you know, she ran for mayor, right? And pretty progressive politics and so on, but like was not able to mobilize a like solid constituency among like Black working class people within Philadelphia. You know, like her base was mostly, it was like a lot of white folks. It was also a lot of people who like maybe, you know, live around UPenn, like gentrified kind of areas of the city and so on. And like, so that's part of it too, is like who do you like, who do you have the respect of in the city as well, on as you're like doing something like running for mayor, you know. And so, you know, Sherelle Parker is like, you know, ran a district up here in North Philly, right? And like, you know, like people didn't like her necessarily, but like had a machine that was there and was integrated in. And so yeah, there's just a lot of different layers to that. I'm sure we'll dig into like more of those as we go, you know, through different episodes of this. One person I did want to talk about, actually, because I think it would bring in like some discussion on a national level for folks, is Fetterman, right? And so Fetterman was lieutenant governor in Pennsylvania for, I want to say like 8 years, like a decent chunk of time under Wolf, who was the previous governor. I mean, funny on some levels, like the Republican ads when those guys were running for re-election, like so showed them like working in a gulag with like communist signs on them and stuff like that. And so like on one level, like the right in Pennsylvania is like, you know, Fetterman is Stalin, right? Like, you know, and then on the left, there was relationships that brought him up partly because you were talking about Krasner, Wiley, and like I think similarly, part of the reputation that Fetterman had was he was on the parole board, I believe, or like kind of overseeing that was like part of his role as lieutenant governor. And he was there and like really was part of the process through which a lot of these juvenile lifers, people with life without parole sentences and so on that were given these sentences while they were still teenagers, right? That many of them ended up getting out through work of, different organizations like Abolitionist Law Center, Amistad Law Center, and so on, like folks who do good work trying to get people out of these systems. But like, somebody like Fetterman actually had, like, it's very hard to believe now because now we see him and he's just like this, sweatshirt, sweat shorts wearing like fascist who's like one of the most like virulent Zionists basically in the Senate. But like, I don't think people really saw that coming. Not to say that he probably was always like vocal when asked about, I support Israel or whatever, but that was not kind of the impression I think that most people had of him as a local level. They thought he was a little bit strange, kind of idiosyncratic, but also somebody that they could work with and talk to. So I don't know if either of you have reflections on that.
You got anything there, Sterling?
No, you can go first, Wiley.
Oh man, I don't know. I mean, I think that part about him being a major Zionist and maybe he was always like that, but no one thought to ask is like kind of worth reflecting on. I feel like there's this way that Palestine has like redefined the political landscape here in the United States, and it's like it's a good stand-in litmus test for politics. Like, I think you can figure out a lot of other stuff about a person just based on that one issue, But like at the time, no one thought to ask him, and like exactly what you said, Jared. Like, yeah, he was he was like a key player in like getting a bunch of lifers out of jail, and like he had support from that camp for sure as like the progressive option, and he, Bernie was running with him, who was also a Zionist, and like, yeah, I don't know, it's interesting to like reflect back on that and how that's sort of like becoming the litmus test, and I think it comes up now like in Mamdani's campaign in New York for mayor. He's like came strong enough on that stuff, and here and there he's starting to like walk that back a little bit, and it's raising a lot of red flags for people because it does just sort of like people you just wind up asking like, okay, well, why are you making that compromise on the like maybe the most like heinous thing that's happening in our time,
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, jump in there. I want to like circle back to like other Zionist stuff maybe, but
yeah, I would say that it's kind of embarrassing. I'm just gonna be honest. It feels so embarrassing. I have been in Pennsylvania for a time. Like we saw Josh Shapiro and Fetterman go up at the same time, and you're just like there at the thing. There are pictures of me like there with these people on the thing. And even during the Senate campaign against, Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz really set off a whole string of events by bringing the national news to Kensington, and there's like the sense that he sells quackery and it's hurt so many people with his theories. But then he's against Fetterman. Fetterman is like somebody that we were like, okay, fine. He has this notorious story of pulling a gun on a black man for no particular reason, but that he was scared, and it's just kind of emblematic of all white fragility, and I just ignored that. I really just ignored that. I'm like, well, I will just, this is who we've got, and even when we're talking about Fetterman being the good person, it's like, who was on the other side of that? The other side of that was the Attorney General, who was going against all of Fetterman's recommendations. I feel like some of that has changed, at least from what I know. Maybe some people, Amistad have said that Shapiro's loosened a little bit, but at the time it seemed like Shapiro was, I personally can't stand him because of that. It's like you're trying to get people out, like out of prison, and we've got everything lined up, but there's always one person, right? It's like you can never get every single poll together moving in the same direction, and I think that feels like that feels like one of the most difficult things of this this electoralism thing, where people even want to have you engage in it. I know I personally just have to. I'm not any party, because it just seems like every single time, like somebody, you did pick the wrong person, right? Even if I didn't pick Fetterman, it's like, well, then I should have voted for Malcolm Kenyatta, and Malcolm Kenyatta has his own thing too, and is like part of the vice president, very close to the Bidens as well, and it's like I feel pretty close with them, but like also it's not a great thing to say that like we're going to use the SEPTA crisis, which is on the backs of every single poor person in your district, to like win the state senate, because that's not the way that it works. No, you fight for people. You fight. He keeps saying like, oh, we fight to make things better. It's like, no, actually, you don't just say it. You actually just do it. And we're kind of like tired of the talk, and it's just but honestly, it's like things that are formed around the where these Philadelphia and Pennsylvania people are in relation to national power. That is what I found that it erodes the local so much, because there's no concern for what is actually happening. It is about like their placement within the national space. And even when it comes to people, I would say for us, we're so close to DC that, the people in York are the ones that were like, they're the closest people to be organizing, a group of three percenters or white supremacists to go down to DC to invade the Capitol, right? So we have those are the other people. That's the other side of the Fetterman. And so like when we talk about like what are the choices, like is this democracy? Is this democracy?
I was telling somebody, we were talking about Fetterman, and I was like, well, you do have to remember he was running against Dr. Oz, right? Like, I mean, it is like, but, I don't think people quite can. It's hard to understand how he had a kind of progressive brand to him in hindsight, but he did. I mean, they were also attacking him, saying that, he was going to release every murderer in Pennsylvania, like onto the streets. Like that was what the ads were that were running against him and so on. Right. And so like, it is a wild, elections in Pennsylvania are really wild, and maybe it's like that everywhere, but like, I don't know, the intensity of it here feels different to me than some of the other places that I've lived over the years. But yeah, I mean, it was a horrible choice from the beginning. I just think that we didn't necessarily know how bad that Fetterman would actually be. I mean, I kind of thought he actually might end up being one of the more progressive senators in the Senate, which is a very conservative institution as a whole. But as you said, like, how much does that, what does that even mean? And especially with him being like just going so hard for genocide, it obviously doesn't mean much of anything, and so it is a good kind of lesson in how bad these options can be. Do you guys want to talk a little bit? Oh, go ahead.
And I do want to say that even the placement of yourself within the progressive space, where like you might support housing or criminal justice reform, it's like your ability to actually get that done in any of these bodies. I have not seen it. I will just say it's like whenever we've won anything too, it's been a little slice, and people's lives are better. I think that's like a very important thing. People's lives are better, but like the ability to change the actual whole, actually, I think we understand that's a little bit more from the ground up, right? It's more just like we are rocking some institution that has to be broken down and destroyed and then remade, And I guess that is what some of the people that are, will yell at you online or in person, or they'll yell at you in person about why you're against any of these very nice people. Even Helen Gim. It's like we've protested Helen Gim. We protested Helen Gim, who's the mayoral candidate, or Jamie Gautier, who's the city council person in West Philly here. Over here, West Philly has so many socialists and anarchists over there that it's just like, it's like you can do some of the most I don't even want to say progressive. You can do some radical things. you get away with it. And the choice is always to do the most middling thing. That kind of gets some things, but then also, doesn't really change the system. And that's the real problem with any electoral stuff.
Well, that, and then like there will be other people that are like on the left that you would maybe have considered a comrade or still consider a comrade, who will like flame you online for like saying some shit about the council person or whatever, and it's like, why are you going after my girl? And I'm like, what, dude? Like, I think there's this kind of like perception that like if you have a seat at the table that you have power, and because like these people talk to you, you have this misunderstanding that you have power, because like sometimes they'll listen to you, or at least they'll make you feel that way, and I think that's like a really poor way to understand like what power is. I think like unless you're talking about setting the table and forcing them to it, like you're not really talking about having power. And I think that's sort of like the difference, and I think that kind of power, often it comes from outside the system. And honestly, the people that are inside the system who are trying to get stuff done, like all that happens when you are outside making a lot of waves is that opens up space for them.
Yeah.
Like they can get more done if there's like a lot of pressure from the outside. It doesn't hurt them. And if they're attacking you for like putting pressure from the outside, then they're probably not actually your ally,
Yeah, I know you and I, all three of us, have talked about this a little bit over the years, but like, this idea of kind of a clientelistic relationship, right? Or this idea of, patronage, right? Sterling, you were kind of lining it out when you talked about like, there's councilmatic privilege or prerogative in Philadelphia. So council people can just do certain projects within their districts because it's my district and I can just do it, and this kind of stuff. There's also big kind of patronage regimes in terms of jobs, like people getting jobs within the city, all this kind of stuff. And that ends up being, and then also with nonprofits, right? Nonprofits getting funded, getting some money from the city, getting money from local foundations, this kind of stuff. And so it creates these networks, kind of to the point that Wiley's talking about, where people see their own interests as aligned with a specific politician, because on some level it is, right? Like they are personally getting their paycheck, right? Because of that person. And like, it's not that you can't sometimes get those people, if they have better politics, to like push something forward on the inside while you are organizing or attacking on the outside, putting pressure on the outside. Like that might be a possibility for sure. But this notion that we have to defend these people, like that's where it becomes a problem, is for some of those folks, their interests are more tied with defending that specific politician than it is in saying like, hey, like y'all are cutting SEPTA, like you can't talk to Comcast about getting some money in here for this. Like one of the funnier things in the whole SEPTA struggle is like they were worried about getting people to and from the Eagles game, right? Because the cuts wouldn't allow enough trains to go to the Eagles game or whatever. And they got, I think it was DraftKings, right? It was either DraftKings or FanDuel. Yeah, DraftKings. And I'm curious both of your thoughts on this. Like some people were like complaining in terms of like, oh, this is like the privatization of the system. Like, no, like you're actually getting somebody who makes a crap load of money off of football to pay to take people back and forth to the football game. Like they should pay. Like, like everybody should ride free. They should just pay for the whole thing. Like, so I don't know how you all feel about that, but I thought it was interesting, even that, like you saw certain people who were angry that like DraftKings was paying for the rides to and from the Eagles game.
Yeah,
maybe y'all didn't see that.
I think I like agree with you. Like on the one hand, like I don't want to privatize public transit. I don't think that's good. But in a situation where the government is now letting public transit fail, I think it's like a better move to be like, okay, well, where can we get the money to keep public transit public, you know? And like, I think that's sort of what I was trying to like. I did a little bit of trying to say it on Twitter, and then I just like got off Twitter and I was like, let me call people who are like actually organizing around this stuff instead of like whatever the fuck that is. But like, you know, I mean, just to put it out there, like University of Pennsylvania is a $25 billion endowment, private Ivy League university here in Philadelphia that pays $0 in property taxes and owns like a quarter of West Philadelphia. I looked at their tax filings, and like they estimate their tax liability that they're not paying because they are technically a nonprofit. They're considered a nonprofit by the city of Philadelphia. They do not pay $91 million in property taxes that all the rest of us have to fucking pay. Like if you either own a house here or you rent, you're paying the property taxes to the city, you know? And like they are the most able to pay, and they pay less than any, like every other Ivy League university in the country pays something. You know, it's called payment in lieu of taxes or whatever. And like, there's been a campaign at Penn forever run by Penn students trying to, and faculty there trying to get them to pay pilots and all that. But I'm like, the city of Philadelphia can just be like, hey, you know what? We are determining that you're not a nonprofit institution and you just have to pay property taxes like everyone else. And then there'd be a lot of money to put into schools or public transit. And there's many, many, many other examples of that in Philadelphia. Comcast, they don't pay property taxes. Almost any development in the city of Philadelphia that's been done in the last 10 years doesn't pay property taxes. Like every big player, every big corporation, they don't pay taxes, you know? And then here we are like in this conversation about everyone has to tighten their belt, you know? And I'm just like, what the fuck? Or we have to pay more, you know? And to me, like that's not more of a focus. Like, where do we find the money? You know, okay, you have a budget shortfall. Well, let's talk about where we can find the money. You know, that to me should be the orientation for like at least people on the outside of the system. We should be coming at them, being like, hey, you're a politician. I don't care what party you are. We're all here. Let's figure it out. You know, and like if you want to be the good guys, then figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, and obviously like it was funny watching it. Like the mayor came up with some money, the school district came up with a little money, like DraftKings drops in a little money. Like it was very easy. I mean, I think do you all remember what the budgetary shortfall was projected to be? Was it 70 million?
I think SEPTA was saying they're short 230 million or so. And then I looked into their numbers, like, you know, I forget how much they were supposedly going to save from the service cuts and fare increases, but it was less than what they said they needed to keep operating. I think it was around 90 million or so. And then when I looked at the fare increase that's going into effect, that's going to be about 45 million that they project to generate, you know, estimating a fall in ridership because people will just stop riding. But like, if you go and look at their budget, you know, they spend like 43 million on police. They have a separate budget for like quote unquote homeless outreach that's like just about sweeping homeless people off the system. That's 7 million, you know. So like they're basically like the fare increases is covering like their police force and repression of homeless people, you know. And I'm just like, to just accept SEPTA's numbers as like, this is what we need, you know, and this is how we're going to balance our budget without looking at their budget and seeing where are they cutting, you know, like they're talking about reducing bus service in Philadelphia and raising fares. Like who's that hitting, you know? And like, what are actually the most expensive parts of the system and what's not getting cut, you know? Because if you start looking at the regional rail, like that operating cost is much, much higher. And like, I don't want to like say we should get rid of regional rail, but like it services some of the richest counties in the country that can afford to pay more than they pay, you know? And people there we could be putting some pressure on the people there to come up with some more money, you know? So I just think like there's a lot of questions like that got skipped because people people were a little too willing to just take numbers on the face value and not interrogate them and not look at it. And because it's, you know, it's complicated, they don't make it easy to like look into that stuff. It's kind of opaque, but when you start to dig, it's like, man, you know.
Yeah, and you know, we were talking about austerity, and it is part of this kind of like dual game, right? There's like the austerity where like we need to cut services of all sorts. There's not enough money for housing or healthcare or anything like that. You know, I'll just put that right to the side. But like the way that development occurs is that it's all financialized. It's like tax increment financing through making development districts, right? So our whole city is just several business improvement districts called bids, and that's money that doesn't go to the general fund. It goes to the bid. There's the Keystone Improvement zones where you know, that's where Penn will put their newest operations, right? So any new entrepreneur that already has a lot of capital doesn't pay any taxes. You know, in fact, that's what, you know, what Penn also has a space called Pennovation where they do create a lot of different things. Like one of the things they do is the robot dogs that were you know, part of you know, going after people on the border and then also going after people in Gaza, you know? So it's like the things that we not only produce, but we encourage, you know, these like through like tax breaks in the United States here, which nobody puts attention to. It feels like, what are we talking about? We should focus on those things, the promise zones that are supposed to like create, I'm not sure what they're supposed to, it's like, these are really just all giveaways to capitalists who usually leads to more exploitation of those spaces. And anybody within those spaces, it's like you're asking them if they're getting the benefit. It's like, well, usually you do have one person that's getting the benefit while everyone else is getting fucked, you know? So but like this also is a space where it's hard to talk about just like right now, because these are things that happened in the 90s. For us, it was with Ed Rendell in the 90s. So when we talk about like why we don't have money as a city for healthcare, it is because we have they decided, you know, in the 90s that they weren't going to invest in it. They were going to depend on the federal government. And that's why when there's a federal government issue or a state issue, then we get all worried. But like, you know, what we could say is, well, why don't we invest some of the money in our system to make a robust health center system so that anybody that is sick can go there and have primary care in our city? We could do that, you know. And those are just things that it's like I love when you talk to older people. They're like, yeah, we used to have a general hospital, yeah. And you know, and I, you know, just the last thing I want to say, it's like it makes me so mad too, because it's important to know the history around this, that like part of the general hospital even going down was because the University of Pennsylvania did basically strip all the services that made money. So it only was a really, you know, indigent like type of hospital. So like once they had like thoroughly like gotten rid of all the services and it's in Penn's hands, then they took it over. And right, so we're in the space of town where the hospital was, where like University of Pennsylvania promised they would build affordable housing, they would like create like services that were accessible to low-income people. There is not. It's just CHOP and the University of Pennsylvania, who, you know, and they have this cancer center, which, you know, only does like really expensive types of care. And they're also, you know, steadily getting rid of every single type of service that like actually does serve anybody that's low income. It's like so we can talk about the rehab that they closed down at Right for like in 2022. Like we can talk about that, but like, and they're just like, oh yeah, this is our decision. But like, you promised that you would keep these services available to people so that people in West Philly had a quality rehab to go to, but now they don't. and it's like the affordable housing that we're talking about also, like, that was the UC Townhomes fight that we talked about, that was talking about 70 affordable homes, like that. So what comes out of Penn shutting down that hospital, the general hospital, was supposed to be affordable housing. That affordable housing was then supposed to be on the site, but it was moved towards the 40th and Market site. And then, when we get there, they're just like, well, this is, you're in 2020, and they're like, well, that just happened. You're just like, it's like, we have to keep the history, like, right, because, like, another promise broken, like, more and more promises broken. And I'm at Temple, and it's like the amount of promises broken by Temple University and University of Pennsylvania, like, just hoping that people will forget, and thank goodness for all the people that will not, right? And from the, I guess I don't want to say their names to implicate them, but, like, for all the elders that are in town that still remember, they will not forget. And thank goodness that, like, people can come in and, like, you talk to that person, they'll tell you what they did, because those people are still around. That's what's so great about, like, at least in this city, those people are still around. They live right there in North Philly, and they'll tell you what Temple did to their family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think this is like something that we'll dig into more in coming episodes, but there's a lot of these plans, right? Like Philly is in this place. We kind of touched on it. It's very sort of well positioned as a couple hours away from New York City, maybe 2.5, 3 hours to DC, right? And not far from Baltimore, right? And it's one of the cities that is still livable to some extent for like working class, lower middle class, sort of folks, to use those kind of terms, like people who just don't make a whole lot of money. But it's also for that reason, it's real estate, right? That developers want to get a hold of, and they want to develop, condominiums and build these new districts and try to get people to basically, move to Philadelphia as like a bedroom community for New York or DC. And it's too far to be like really easy, but hey, if you get a high speed train, or if you only have to work there, say you only have to show up in the office 2 or 3 days a week, or show up to teach or whatever, a couple of days a week, like there are people who are already doing that. And I think it's something that the city sees, and they also obviously want to bring in, whether it's tech jobs or biotech, or like, different engineering firms and things like this, to try to attract. And so, yeah, they create these districts. They don't let, they let these companies get away without paying any taxes. And it's always this promise, sort of, that it's going to somehow magically benefit like the people who live in the city, and it just never does. And I know one of the things we want to cover in future ones too is that with 2026 coming up, maybe we could say a little bit about the things that are coming up then. But there's a number of, like, there's both important national anniversaries, and Philadelphia, of course, was like the original capital of the United States, right? And there's a lot of that kind of colonial, history from the early years that's still preserved and is still like tourist attractions and things like that. But beyond that, there's also a number of like major national and international sporting events that they're trying to host here. And the city is not like very well set up to host like major events. It just, there's not it's not well situated that way. So that's also a little bit scary in terms of like what are their plans to kind of prepare for that. So yeah, I don't know if either of you want to tease that a little bit, but I know we'll be talking about that in future episodes.
You can go, Wiley. Do you have anything?
Yeah. I mean, we got the World Cup coming too. That's a big one, and I think LA is kind of struggling with some of the same stuff. They got the Olympics in 2028, and like I think something that like comes with that is a lot of federalization of your local police department, and I think we're probably already like well into that here without there being any public discussion about it. Like I don't think it's even on anyone's radar that
Philly PD's probably signed a bunch of MOUs with Department of Homeland Security around the World Cup and like what that's going to mean. I think as far as it being like inhospitable, you have all the stuff going on with ICE enforcement. I'm like not really sure what an international fan base coming to the city is going to want to come here with kind of that climate or whatever. I think the SEPTA thing plays into all that. And I think I guess I want to like go back to like, because we've been kind of talking about like broken promises or treaties, you know, and like the colonial history of the United States and all that kind of stuff. And we're talking about like land and power and stuff. And I think it's just like a good, like to remember like this is a settler colony, just like Israel is. And like, that's why you have these fault lines play out so much of the time. That's why developers kind of like, you know, their solution to poverty is not let's do social programs. It's like, let's make it inhospitable here and displace poor people to somewhere the fuck else where they can go die and it won't be on our hands, you know? And that is the outlook of the elite here. And like, I think sometimes like people talk about it like this is kind of like abstract, but I've been really kind of like learning since October 7th, a couple years ago, like, and all that went down in Palestine, like how viscerally connected settler colonialism is to the power structure here, you know, and like the people that own the 76ers, our basketball team, like they have a footprint in Israel. They have a youth basketball league called the 48ers with the same logo as the 76ers in Israel to prepare marginalized youth in Israel for service in the IDF. You know, like that's what they do, you know, and that guy, Josh Harris, who's the owner, he's a Penn graduate and he formed Apollo Global Management with Mark Rowan and Leon Black. Mark Rowan's also a Penn graduate. They're both on the board at Penn. They were both involved in the repression of the like campus protests against Palestine, as was our governor, like we mentioned earlier. The other guy they formed Apollo Global Management with had to step down because of his ties with Epstein. That came out, his involvement with Epstein. He had to step down in 2020 when all that kind of got released. The guy they tapped to front their basketball stadium project they wanted to put in Chinatown and like threaten Chinatown with, he owns he's the CEO of Campus Apartments, which is like the largest off-campus student housing corporation in the United States. And it's in that West Philadelphia promise zone you mentioned, Sterling, where any money that gets invested in it has a 10-year tax-free ride. It just stays parked there for 10 years. So he's also got like a financial investment company that's based there that like the president of Drexel was involved in, and the head of the building trades union who backed our mayor was involved in. And Mayor Cheryl Parker very much rode in on the coattails of like backing this stadium. And like that guy, Edelman, he's also a Zionist, and he ran the Greater Philadelphia Jewish Federation, which is like, sounds really benign, but they send money directly to settlements in Israel or Palestine in the occupied territories, West Bank, directly to them. They have a long 20-something year relationship with one of the kibbutz right outside Gaza. You know, they raised over $40 million from the Philadelphia area for the IDF after October 7th. And like, there's just like these ways that, or like the owner of UC Townhomes, Altman, his family was honored by the Israel bonds for their lifelong commitment to buying Israel bonds. And like, a lot of that stuff is like just very baked in and benign in the Jewish community, and like folks who grew up in that community can talk about it, but it's like, there's this way where like over the last couple of years, I've been like, oh shit, like basically every land struggle I've ever been involved in Philly, like fighting against development and that kind of stuff, like there's been a player who has like a direct tie to colonialism in Palestine. And like that's just like a very real part of the power structure here. And like, I'm sure it's not like that in every city in the country, but like, man, like those are it's the same network, you know, it's the same people. So I don't know. And like you put on top of that, like Wharton Business School has more billionaire alumni than any other business school in the United States. That's Penn's business school. Trump went there, his kids went there. Biden went there, his kids went there. Like all these people, like they network here, you know, and like they sometimes intervene in our local politics to just make sure, you know, like that's going to continue to reproduce itself, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you laying all that out. And I would be throwing my Sixer hat across the room right now, but I don't have another one nearby and my hair is messy. So I'm not going to do that right now. But yeah, I mean, I think there is I think we'll have to do a whole episode kind of on Philadelphia and, you know, maybe do one thinking about the settler colonial history here, as well as the connections to Israel, which are deep. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu lived in Montgomery County, went to high school here, right? And so like there's a lot of connections in this area. Josh Shapiro too, also the governor, like you mentioned his connection also, but like I think he lives in Jenkintown, right? Like he lives right outside of the city. You know, and so like there's a strong, you know, kind of connection of you know, Zionist politics that is right here.
And I did want to just state that, you know, I don't think as much work has been done on it, and you know, I know I needed to do it as well as many others, but it, you know, when we're talking about the settler colonialism, like this is where it starts. It's like these, you know, the Declaration of Independence was signed here, the Constitution was signed here. Like generally, what happened like in the 1700s and the early 1700s, you know, is not, there's just not as much done on it as in like the West, right? It's like 1862, Minnesota, you know, you're talking about times that are already where this part of the world is already done the genocide, you know, is already settled, has already moved people out. And I guess I just want to put a pin in that, because looking at like Quaker complicity in genocide is like, it's not usually where people are at, but it's like, it's a pretty important thing to say, because much of the work is not, I don't know, it just doesn't really put the Quakers in the crosshairs, because they're often the allies in the you know, in the pacifist movement or an anti-war movement, you know. And I think that you have to look towards there to see that even though there is a, you know, they get rid of slavery in 1780, it's like even before the Constitution they had like abolished slavery, whatever, over time. But it's like, but you still had Ben Franklin like writing for to give money for each scalp of indigenous person that they received. That still happened. That usually, I don't really see that in the museums, but that's the actual fact. They wanted to kill as many indigenous people in Pennsylvania as they could so that they could take the land. And I think that I'll stop there because more needs to be said, but that's not often the story, or at least the first thing that people think about.
100%. Yeah, I know that we kind of want to wind down, but I'll just read through some great comments from the chat, and we can kind of talk about, you know, we'll make sure to have another episode, you know, not too long. Like, I don't know if we'll be able to do one next week, maybe, but if not, in the next couple weeks, we'll try to keep this going here. So yeah, of course, please like, share, subscribe, connect with people. Also, if people are, you know, from Philly or live in Philly and there are political issues or, you know, struggles or things like that they want to talk to us about, like, reach out and we'll connect, and, you know, we can talk, and maybe we can come up with an idea on something to do together. A lot of folks from Philly that were in the chat today too, so that's cool. Good to see you. To struggle to get people to think about the city's political economy, power dynamics, and the role of domestic U.S. Commonwealth and global flows. Yeah, we have to delve into the Commonwealth thing too, because that's a whole other, like most states are not commonwealths in the United States. It has its own like kind of weird political structure that way. Somebody called for the Eagles to be nationalized. We did give a shout out. What was her name? The actress last night that said go Birds, fuck ICE, and free Palestine. That was nice. That was a nice little Philly moment at the Emmys last night. The horrible, colonial event.
Hannah Einbinder.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes. Go Birds.
And Go Birds. And then, yeah, all the Philly trains, yeah, they were all rolled out in like the 70s or the 80s, 90 to 91 for the elevated trains. The infrastructure is just as old and older for the most part. Yeah, it's a system that's literally falling apart, and yet like a lot of people rely on it, like a whole lot. And that's the other thing is like we didn't get into that much, but I also just think, all of these employers rely on this system to get their workers to them. Like the fact that is not something that is like really hammered, by even the local politicians just tells you a lot about their deference to all of these corporations and interests. Yeah, when the largest employer is nonprofit, as most schools are, UPenn, then they don't pay taxes on the land they own or the business they run. That's a huge drain in cities. It absolutely is. And like there are other places, like we talked about this thing, pilots, payments in lieu of taxes. Like the other Ivy League schools are doing this. Like there have been efforts to try to get Penn to do it. And I just think it just needs to be, that's like such an important thing that people could organize around that would make a big difference. They're literally the largest employer and also maybe the largest landowner or one of the largest landowners in the city, probably the largest, and not paying any taxes. On Fetterman, seemed like the aesthetic gave people an illusion of who he was. He's Ivy League educated, but presented as working class, a diabolically brilliant political play. Yeah, I mean, that was like in Philly, I feel like when he was in Pennsylvania, I think his thing was more wearing Dickies, but now it's like the sweatshirts and the gym shorts and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, definitely has a certain aesthetic. We didn't get into it a lot. He has a longer history in PA too as a mayor of like a small town before he became lieutenant governor also, but maybe we'll delve into that a little bit on a future episode. Other things that came up, people brought up Frank Rizzo a few times, which is a history that we didn't talk about today, but it's a really important history. Like I can't even count the number of times that, I've had Black elders talk about, growing up in the Rizzo years, whether he was mayor or whether he was the chief of police. Like just really, there's a lot that we could talk about that history. And then Wilson, not so good, with blood on his hands as well. First Black mayor of Philly, and also the one who was mayor during the move bombing, right? And so, yeah, there's a lot of history. There's a lot of different struggles that we can talk about and things like that. So we look forward to future ones. Anything you want to add, Sterling?
Yeah, I did just want to say that I'm excited to do this, and I don't know. It seems like people in the chat maybe they have things that they want to come on and talk about. But I think a lot of people know that history, and I guess I will repeat it that around Move and the bombing of Move, and I will say Mike Africa is still raising money to purchase the house. If any people should be giving to that, it's been up a couple of years, so people should give as much as they can to help buy 6200 block of Osage Avenue. But like there's a lot of things that have happened since then that just have to be stated. And also there are so many fights that are still ongoing that there hasn't been like enough like broad pressure from OMIA, to the fact that the move house still hasn't been support enough to be bought. I'm just kind of interested in going a little deeper, because all that stuff feels like it seems very national very, very in vogue to like mention move, but I'm like, well, help the family buy that damn house then. Everyone's, I see Colin Kaepernick mention it. It's like, doesn't he? I don't understand. How do so many people get to mention these things and not really support them, Because we just live here, and if you want to, I don't know, if you want to see Pam Africa, she was down at the church talking about Black history, and you can find them. They're around, And those people, when I think about like people in Philly, it is about, I don't know, so many people in Philly, and what John Africa was about was just like Black self-determination and like figuring out our own shit. And I just really appreciate that, and I think about my family, my uncles and aunts, and all that stuff. What they taught me, So anyway, I'm, as a person that's halfway from here, I'm like pretty excited to get deep and down in the muck of it.
Right on. Sterling, do you know if this is the fundraiser here?
Yeah.
That's it? Okay. Yeah, so I'll put the link of this in the show description, and I'll drop it in the chat too. But yeah, I mean, maybe in a future episode we could get somebody from the Move family on to kind of talk about that, or get Mike on. But yeah, so all right, thanks everybody. It's been great to share this with you. Hope you got something out of it, and look forward to future episodes. Wiley, thanks a lot for coming through and having the SEPTA analysis ready too.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me and listening to my rantage.
You're always welcome to rant, man. All right.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks.